Welcome to another episode of the Manufacturing Executive Podcast. This show is being brought to you by our sponsor, Cadenas Part Solutions. I'm Joe Sullivan, your host and a co-founder of the industrial marketing agency Gorilla 76. Somewhere along the way, any successful business owner will have a moment where the question pops into their head, what's next for the company after me? Many of the B2B manufacturers that my firm has consulted over the years are second or third generation family-owned businesses. And in those cases, sometimes the succession plan is pretty clear. Other times that path isn't as obvious. But regardless, transitioning ownership and leadership of a company isn't something that happens overnight. And there are so many different ways to do it. Today, my guest is an expert on this exact topic. So let me introduce NickJackson, principal of the Mendota Group. The Mendota Group, based in Madison, Wisconsin, acquires small to medium-sized manufacturing, distribution, and service businesses that are either privately owned or subsidiaries or divisions of publicly owned companies. Their objective is to make acquisitions and enable management to significantly enhance value through increased operating efficiency, internal growth, and acquisition. Nick personally has a wide array of business experience that includes operations, finance, and sales within the banking and telecommunications industries. Prior to joining the Mendota Group, Nick was part of an executive leadership team that launched a competitive telecommunications company with networks throughout the Midwest. He brings his broad operations experience leading this fast-paced, growth-focused organization to help make the companies in the Mendota Group portfolio successful. Nick, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me.
You bet. My pleasure. Well, Nick, before we start digging through all the knowledge and experience you've got stored up there in your brain as a private equity guy that's been working specifically in the industrial sector for years, can you give us kind of a brief rundown of just how you got to where you are today and what Mendota Group's all about?
Yeah. As you said in the intro, we're all about buying small entrepreneurial manufacturing companies where owner of the company is looking to transition into a next phase of their life. And our objective is to get in there as active investors and work with the management team to kind of take that company to its next level, whether that's growing through acquisition or growing organically. And most of the companies we're looking at are companies that have been owned by the entrepreneur for quite some time. The entrepreneur may have founded the company, and they're really, successful, profitable companies, but the entrepreneur had kind of achieved the level of a size that they were satisfied with. And so that entrepreneur may have slowed down their growth. They kind of went into a little bit of we call it a lifestyle business. And we really like those opportunities because we believe that we can then take that great work that the entrepreneur did and kind of jump off from that point to add more thought and strategy around growth. And the reason I got into the business is, as you mentioned in the intro, I'd been in some other high growth businesses and did some startups with some other guys that I was partners with. And I just always really liked the challenges that come with trying to build a growth company, not just the sales and marketing challenges, but how do you build up processes to scale and grow? How do you find people that fit the DNA of a growth company? How do you fine tune strategy and keep people focused? So when I met my partner, he was just starting off Curtis Burgess, he was just starting off looking at buying these small companies. And I had a background in helping to build strategies and put in place processes for growth. And the two of us got together and said, hey, we think we can really use each of our skill sets and experiences to find these entrepreneurial companies and take them to that next level.
That's great. You and I were talking recently as we were kind of thinking about doing an episode together here. You were talking about different options for manufacturing ownership as they look at transitioning their business. And in particular, you touched on the difference between a financial buyer, a strategic buyer, and an active investor, which was kind of, it was interesting for me to hear about that. And I think our audience would benefit from you kind of unpacking the difference between these different types of potential buyers or investors.
Yeah. Yep. So anytime now, again, we're not talking about the sale of like a big public company that we'd see in the newspaper. We're talking about sale of companies that, let's say, are under 100 million of revenue or under even 50 million of revenue, which is the world we live in. So when that person or a couple partners, when they're thinking about selling, there are some natural options, and they're the buckets you were just referring to. So the way I like to explain it is the first bucket would be what we in our industry call a strategic buyer. So this is somebody who, it's likely a company that exists in the industry already, probably knows of or could easily know of the company that's selling. They may either be competitors, or they may do business with each other, or they kind of cross paths in channels or cross customers. And so this strategic buyer is a company that's in the industry. They're looking to grow through acquisition. They have criterion around customers and products and talent that they're trying to achieve through acquisition. And they would look to buy the company and, either roll it up under the company, under the parent company, or run it separately. It kind of depends on the situation. But again, it's more of somebody who's buying the company because they see a strategic advantage to staying in their industry through acquisition. So that's one bucket. The second bucket is what we generally refer to as a financial buyer. So this would be people like us or others, like a private equity fund, or fundless sponsors, or active investors like Curtis and I. And these are people who are doing an acquisition strictly as an investment. So we don't have a particular interest in the industry. We don't own a company that is in that space that the seller is in. But we're looking for opportunities where we can deploy our capital, just like any other investment, and we see a great opportunity to put that capital in, grow that business, improve the value of it, and someday eventually exit it through a sale or otherwise to make a good return on our investment. So it's more of a financial growth investment strategy, and we're trying to get into that industry on our own. And interestingly enough, I should just say that guys like us, private equity groups or active investors like Curtis and I, we can kind of actually play in both of those categories. So for instance, we have done 17 transactions in the 20 years we've been in business, and we're just about to do 2 more transactions. So we're about 1 a year. Well, there are many of those transactions, they've been that financial category where we're buying a company from scratch. It's a new industry to us. We're putting in new capital, and we're starting from scratch. But there are other times where we've acted like a strategic, meaning we already owned a company in a space, and then we found an acquisition that we thought was a great add-on to our company. And so through our existing investments in a company, we went and did an acquisition as a strategic buyer. So you can kind of play in both buckets, but that's how people generally think of the 2 buckets.
Great. Well, talk about a little bit about the process for, ownership at a manufacturing company as they consider and then begin working with an outside investor or buyer. What does it look like to, seek someone out and then to actually start the process of maybe vetting an investor and beginning to work with them?
Yeah. It's not a short process. If it's going to be done well, and it's going to be thorough, and it's going to, produce an end result that's beneficial to both the seller and the buyer and the employees and all that, it takes time. My advice to anybody thinking about selling is be prepared to kind of think through this process in a fairly, could be a year or more to prepare for it. There's a lot of different ways it can go, but the way we're used to, and a lot of people in our space are used to, is the seller, comes to their personal decision of, hey, it's time for me to move on, for whatever that reason is. And there's a myriad of reasons people could say it's time to go. But once they get to that point and they've worked with their family and their advisors and they say, hey, it's really time for me to consider an option, the best way for them to proceed is to usually seek out an advisor that is going to help them get through this process. This is it's a complicated process. It's an emotional process because somebody's selling their business, which is very, very, important. There's people and employees involved. There's confidentiality involved. So in the end, I always encourage sellers to really seek out somebody who is an active advisor and does these types of transactions on a regular basis, because they can be very, very helpful in guiding that seller through the process. So that's step one, is find an advisor. And those advisors, we can talk about that separately, but those people are called, sometimes they're referred to as investment bankers, sometimes they're referred to as business brokers. But they're not that hard to find. A little bit of Google searching, a little bit of working through your network. Certainly any of your listeners, I could help them with ideas. But there are people out there who do a great job of working for the seller to assess not only the value of the business, but also to market the business to the right kinds of buyers, which is really important. So find an advisor. The next step is really for that advisor to work closely with the company. And sometimes this can take years, but it can also go quickly. But usually once they've established a relationship with an advisor who is a good fit for them, then that advisor is going to spend time, having done, lots of these transactions, they're going to spend time with the seller, getting to know the business. What are your customers? Where's your revenue come from? What are the challenges in your industry? What kind of financial performance do you have? And it's that advisor, because they've done a lot of transactions, they can put themselves in the shoes of us as a buyer, and then they can give advice to the seller to say, look, your company's a really nice company, but anybody that's going to buy it is probably going to ask these questions. And so let's fix some of that stuff and address it and make sure we got good answers for that, so that when we go to the market, you're going to get the best value, because there isn't, things that a seller or buyer finds in the course of trying to buy it. So they'll work with them. They'll do some analysis of financials. They'll get to know the business, and they'll kind of clean up, let's say, anything that, could be improved. It's like fixing up the things in your house before you put it on the market, just to tighten things up.
Yeah, good analogy. Makes sense.
Yeah, so then once the advisor's done that and they're ready to go to market per se, that's when now that advisor will actually put together a very professional document. It's usually a book or PDF that gets emailed out. It's got all kinds of information about the company. It's essentially a marketing piece to talk about the company, the industry, the employees, the financials, all the stuff that guys like us care about. Mm-hmm. And then that advisor also has a Rolodex or a network of guys like us. And so now that advisor is going into marketing mode, and they're saying, okay, I've got this business to sell. I got this great seller who's ready to sell. I know all this information about the company, which I put into this document. And now I'm going to go find the types of buyers that are a good fit for this seller. Who will take care of the business long term? Who will take care of the employees? Whatever. And they through their process of emails and networks and phone calls, they find guys like us. So we get called, multiple times a week. Hey, I got this business. What do you think? They'll send us the information. It's still kind of confidential and private. We don't know the name of the business. If it's something we're interested in, we sign a non-disclosure agreement. They get us more information. Now we're starting to show up in the process, and the advisor is working with us and trying to vet who is a legitimate interested party. Then once they've kind of narrowed that down to, 5 to 10 parties who are genuinely interested in getting to know the business, that's when the advisor will say, okay, for these people, we know who's interested. They've given us kind of an indication what they think the value might be. Let's get them in here to meet the seller, the team, see the facility. So at that point, a short list of potential buyers are coming in. They're looking at the company, they're looking at the facility, they're learning. And then after that process, it gets narrowed down to, okay, who wants to put an offer in to actually potentially buy the company. That's called a letter of intent. So now if we've made it to the point of that process where we want to submit a letter of intent to actually buy the company, we submit it, the advisor reviews that with the seller. It's essentially just like looking at offers on your house. He picks the one based on not only the value, but how he met us, he likes us, he doesn't like us, whatever. He's picking a match. And then the seller will sign that letter of intent to say, yes, I'd like to get married to you or sell to you. And at that point, there's usually about a 90-day process of, going through due diligence, negotiating agreements, all kinds of paperwork and stuff. But essentially, the buyer and the seller say, we are going to work together. We're going to go through 90 days of selling the company. And then, there's a day of close and we exchange checks and we're off and running.
Great. Really great breakdown there. I mean, very clear step-by-step process. You should write an article about it.
Well, the reason I say that, and this is my word to the wise, my advice to all of your listeners who are potential sellers. A good advisor, they aren't necessarily cheap. They get paid based on the value of the business. And that's a negotiated rate. That's a separate topic. But they have a cost. And we've seen a lot of investors or a lot of entrepreneurs who they look at that percentage and that rate and they're like, man, that seems like a lot of money. I don't understand. That seems expensive. I could sell this by myself. I know people. And I'm just here to tell you, having done this many times, there is a ton of value in having somebody who's a professional advisor in the middle who is there for the purpose of representing the seller. And while the price tag may look expensive at the beginning, that when the process is over, it'll be much more professionally done. It'll be much less headache to the seller. And I will guarantee them that they'll look back and say, I'm glad I had that guy in the middle. So I just encourage everybody to, I think most entrepreneurs think, oh, if I want to sell my company, I'll reach out to some people I know that could be buyers and get a sense for the value. And that may seem like the right way to do it, but it will not lead to good information. And it's much better to go through a process of vetting or interviewing good advisors and then let them go through that process. And so, I always offer to people, hey, we've got advisors that we respect, we love doing business with. We think they're really stand-up people that treat these transactions very well. And I would encourage a seller to spend more time in interviewing those people versus trying to find buyers.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. It's, it's something that's applicable in so many different levels of running a business, right? From your accounting to your marketing to finance. Like there are things, you can do it yourself, you can figure it out, but the more you lean on an expert and bring in true experts to handle it, you look back and say, okay, yeah, that was the right choice. And
that's
geez,
right.
What more important decision than when you're transitioning your business to lean on an expert, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and just I think it's a great point. No matter what the expertise is, financial, marketing, sales, selling a business, there's a lot of people that can do the job, but they're still people and they got to fit with you. They got to fit with you as a seller. They got to fit with your style as a company. And so, it's important to vet that and take time to find somebody who you think you can trust and who matches your style as a seller.
Yeah. Well, you talked about sort of what happens leading up to a sale. How about after a deal has closed? What's, in the case of an active investor, a professional buyer like Mendota Group, where you actually are going to play a role in after the sale, what does that look like? What does the interaction and engagement between your organization and your acquisition actually look like?
Yeah. So, as I said earlier, we're in that bucket of financial buyer typically.
Okay.
But even in that bucket of financial buyer, we look different, or we believe we're different because we're fairly active, very active investors.
Mm-hmm.
And Curtis and I, we really enjoy not just doing the transaction and making an investment, but we actually take our role as an investor very seriously. We really like to get to know the team, get to know the business, and then hopefully get to a point where we can be even helpful with some ideas and thoughts on where we're taking the business.
Mm-hmm.
So on the day we close, meaning close the transaction, fund it, they're literally, we are going to stand up in front of all the employees with the seller and make an announcement to the employees saying, hey, I've sold the business. Here's the new guys, the Mendota Group, NickJackson, Curtis Burgess, and, just kind of make an introduction. And then we're literally going to walk around that day with the seller there, and we're just going to spend time getting to know people, just shaking hands, saying hi, and just letting people know that this isn't the boogeyman, because for a lot of employees who aren't, sophisticated in business or whatever, and they're just working on the shop floor, they hear the seller is, most times they know the seller is likely getting ready to sell because the seller is getting to that age. They may not be showing up every day at the office. They may be getting property down in Phoenix or Florida. You know what I'm saying? People are smart. They can see, hey, the owner of the company is getting ready for retirement. And unless that owner is being real obvious to, hey, my son or daughter's taking it over, or my other partner, unless that's real transparent, those employees are going to start in the back of their mind going, man, when's he going to sell? How's that going to go? Will I have a job? It's nerve-wracking for people who are just employees. So what we try to do on that first day is, after we announce the sale, we try to make it very clear to people, because it's factual and it's true, that nothing's really changed. We are the new owners, but we bought the company because we value the company and because we want it to continue for a long, long time. And so we're not the boogeyman. We're not just the new guy buyers. We're real people from the Midwest, and we're going to be involved in the business, and they'll see us around, and we have names and families, and it's just keep it real. We're just kind of moving forward. So that's kind of the first real big step. And then, really the first 6 months of our ownership, we try to do as little as possible changing things. What we're trying to do is Curtis and I, we kind of split up our company. So one of us will be the point person, and we'll try to be on site at the company, a couple days a week for like 6 months, getting to know people, spending time with the management team, trying to learn more about the customers, trying to learn more about the product, getting to know who are the key leaders in the organization, just trying to get smarter about the company, so that beyond that 6 months, when the company's starting to deal with things, then, hopefully we've got a little more insight about the company and the products and the customers that we can offer insights that are helpful to that management team. So there's that learning phase. And then after the learning phase, then we really start to, come up with, okay, what's going to be our strategy for growth? So usually that means the prior owner is now moving into their next phase of life, retirement, whatever, and we're likely going to bring in a CEO, somebody who's at a different stage of their career, who's probably going to be growth oriented, who's got experience in other companies, growing them, and we'll bring that person in, and they're going to be the new CEO. They're going to run the thing day to day, and then they're going to start to build the strategy for the future of where are we going to grow, and just all the things that normal business people do. And then we'll, at that point, kind of move to the background. And while we won't be there maybe a couple days a week every week, we'll start to be there once a month. We spend time talking to the CEO on a regular basis, but we'll meet with the management teams once a month, and we talk about financials and key objectives. And now we get into more of a rhythm of like a monthly management review. And that's kind of how we do it until we decide that it's time for us to move on.
That's good. And what's that life cycle usually like, where you are inside the company helping grow them before you yourself decide it's time to exit?
Yeah, it's a good question. We always kind of tell people, based on companies we've sold, we tend to own things for 7 to 10 years at least. We don't have a set day we need to be out of it. We view every investment we make like any other investment you would make. If we're in the business and we feel like it's got room to grow, and the team is really awesome, and they've got a great growth strategy, and we think that where the thing sits today, it can double again because they can grow it. We're going to stay in it because why would I take my investment out of that and try to find something else? If we feel like we've grown it and we've done as much as we can and we can't do much more, and it's time for the next buyer to come in and help, then that's when we'll typically look to sell. But, I would say, growing a company, coming up with the strategy, getting all the right people aligned, that stuff doesn't happen overnight. So, 7 to 10 years is a typical scenario.
Sure. So let's pretend I'm the owner of a manufacturing company. I might be listening right now, and I'm starting to look down the road 3 or 5 years, or maybe even a little further down the road when, thinking about when it might be time for me to transition out. What kind of information should I be gathering now or starting to think about, just, kind of looking out onto the horizon a bit? And are there, specific resources you'd point people to just so they can educate themselves and be prepared for when that day comes?
Yeah. Good question. Again, I would go back to my comment about advisor. I know a lot of sellers who by the time we bought the company, they had known the advisor they used for like 5 years. So I would suggest to a seller that if he's thinking about potentially selling the company, even if it's 3 to 5 years from now, I'd even go through the process of meeting some advisors now and getting some of those names, because there's a great chance that if he kind of focused on an advisor to potentially sell the company somewhere down the road, what that advisor will want to do is, for free, spend time getting to know the business and just getting to know that seller over the course of a couple, 3 years. And it might be just have coffee or have dinner or whatever, but they cultivate a relationship and an understanding of the business. And over time, they can give guidance to that seller about, hey, think of this, gather that, be prepared, 3, 4 years down the road. So many of these advisors will say, look, I'd love to get to know you and get to know your business for 3, 4 years before you even sign a contract that says you're going to pay me. So I definitely push people that way. Things that they should get to be thinking about. There's a lot, but the quickies, I would say that they definitely should spend some time making sure that their financial records are in order. Get a professional accounting firm in there. If they don't want to pay for an audit, they should at least be paying for professionally compiled financial statements. When guys like us show up, we want to know that we're not just looking at a tax return, that we're actually looking at a set of financial statements that were prepared and reviewed by a professional accounting firm. It would be ideal if somebody could, if they're going to sell their business, that they've got 3 years of professionally prepared financials. That's something to be thinking about. I think that they need to look at their management team, and they need to really make sure that they've got a management team in place, and they need to use somebody outside to give them objective opinions about what is a good management team. Because again, the value of a business is going to drop if the seller has to admit that when they leave, a bunch of information leaves the business, like customer relationships or technical information. So that seller needs to know, or they need to be able to convince a buyer that the people that are in place are generally capable and professional at continuing to run the business, and that not too many either customer relationships or operational issues are relying on the seller being there. Because if that's the case, then the seller can't get away from the business. So making sure that team is really top notch, and they're locked into, or they're brought into the loop of what's going on with the business and where they're headed with the strategy and how to handle customers. That's an important part too. Taking care of things like key equipment purchases. You don't want to sell business when you got equipment that's not good. That's basic stuff. Most entrepreneurs know the value of good equipment. And then, the last thing is everybody who buys a company, they want to know that there's an opportunity for growth. And so there's two issues there. One is don't be a business that has just one or two customers that are 60, 70, 80% of your business. If you have a lot of customer concentration, that's going to raise concerns for buyers, because we're going to say, well, what if you leave a seller and that customer goes, well, I liked working with Joe, now I'm out of here, and that creates risk for us. So they should do as much as they can to build as broad of a customer base to show diversity for the future. And that's a healthy business practice anyway, but it's definitely healthy to convince a buyer that there's not risk. And then, the other thing is to really make sure that they've got their head around the market they're in and the types of customer potential that's out there. It's not that they have to be actively selling into those markets, but they got to be able to explain to us, why do you do business? Why do people, buy from you? What's important about you? And how do we, double that into the future? So kind of getting their head around that value proposition, as you and I have talked about, is, they got to at least take a shot at trying to align that.
That's all great stuff. I mean, and everything you just touched on, these sort of, quick fire, here's the stuff to get in order. I mean, this is the stuff you just want to be doing anyway, right? Like,
exactly.
I don't remember who said it, but I received some bit of advice along the way, run your business at all times like you're looking to sell your business. And, if you just think this way, having the right people in place, having your positioning straight, who do we help and how? What value do we create? What's that, value proposition, like you said, having your financials in order and having good advisors to help you with that stuff. All of that stuff is it's key to running a business anyway. And hopefully, people listening are thinking, yeah, I mean, we've got our stuff in order, but if we don't, well, it's probably regardless of where we are in our life cycle, it's time to start doing that right.
Well, yeah. And if you don't mind, I'll accentuate that a point.
Yeah, please.
This concept of a lifestyle business that I've talked to you about, it's not a critical comment. It's just a factual comment. And what we mean when we say lifestyle business is we're talking about a business where the owner or owners have become satisfied with the level that the business got to, meaning that business has grown to a point where it's large enough and it's stable enough and it produces enough income or wealth for that owner that the owner has achieved their financial, objectives, which, by the way, is an unbelievable accomplishment. And, all those entrepreneurs should be commended for getting there. But there's a natural point where if you're in your 60s and your company's operating well, you got a couple key customers, things are good, you're making good profit, you're headed into, you got a good lifestyle. That business now, it's very often that owner is very satisfied with the situation and doesn't really, how do I want to say this, doesn't really bring their management team into the decision-making of where is this business going to go. Because essentially they're saying, look, I've done great stuff with this business. My family's taken care of. I got great employees. I pay them well. I don't care about growth. I'm good. But what naturally happens then is if that seller steps back and says, okay, how much of this day-to-day decision-making or whatever is on me, he or she's going to quickly realize that almost every key decision, financial decision, whatever, is running over his desk, and that his team is very limited in what they know or that they're directing the company. And I would say that if they want to sell the business, the sooner they can get that team more into the day-to-day of the business and pull themselves out of it, the better it is. Because when I show up as a buyer, I want to be confident that that's a stable, profitable, good company, even if I pluck the seller out. And so that process of saying, can I pluck myself out as a seller, I would tell the seller, either through an advisor or a trusted friend or something, to really have somebody say, are you really, able to pluck yourself out? Does this business, is it a healthy, growing, standalone business by itself? And, I've had many conversations. I've said this to you. If you ever have people that are in that position and they want some ideas of, what that means, I've had lots of conversations with entrepreneurs, and it's very quick for an outside set of fresh eyes to see where that isn't. He's not prepared to pluck himself out, and getting a couple of those eye openers, I think sometimes it gives an entrepreneur a couple 3 years to kind of update or improve that situation.
I really love that piece of advice, and it's something that I've thought about in my own company too. If I were to disappear, which I don't have any intention of that happening, but would this business go on without me and my business partner, John? The same thing. The more you can remove yourself from being a necessary part of this company being successful and profitable and self-sustaining, you need to make it happen. So I really love that nugget.
I was going to just add one more piece there.
Yeah.
A lot of times entrepreneurs are anxious about being open and honest with their employees or their key leaders, let's say. Mm-hmm. They're anxious about starting to talk about this sensitive topic of, hey, I might be selling the business.
Mm-hmm.
But again, my advice to them is, if you aren't talking about it, but you're at that stage of your life where it's likely going to happen, mm-hmm. they're already thinking about it.
Yeah.
So don't think that they're not thinking about it, because they are, and they might even be nervous about it. Mm-hmm. And the sooner you bring a couple key employees in, and you in a very professional but discreet way say, hey, I am thinking about this process. It's going to be a multi-year preparation, but I want you as a trusted leader of the organization to elevate your role so that you can be a valued asset to the business for when I eventually exit. Mm-hmm. That not only is going to help create that environment where the seller can pluck himself out, but it's also going to diminish the concerns and worries of those key people, because again, in the back of their mind, they're thinking, well, Joe's going to sell the business one day. When is that happening, and do I have a job? So it really is valued to pick a few of those people, bring them into your confidence, and work out a transition plan of what role they play in that process.
Yeah, that's really smart advice. Nick, great conversation today. This was fantastic. I learned a lot myself listening to this, and I think any business owners out there, manufacturing leaders who are, whether their plans are right here on the horizon or further down the road, there's a lot they can take from what you were able to share here. So really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, I'm glad I could help, and always excited to talk about what we do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, well, tell listeners here where they can connect with you online. What's the best way to get in touch, and how they can learn a little more about Mendota Group as well?
Yep, our website, themendotagroup.com. You can kind of see what we're up to and what our portfolio. We have 6 companies today, so you can kind of see that. I can be reached at Jackson@themendotagroup.com. Mendota is spelled MENDOTA. Jackson@themendotagroup.com, and they can see my other contact information out there. I'm also on LinkedIn under NickJackson. So yeah, I'd love to, if anybody wants to reach out and talk further, happy to do so.
I would encourage anybody listening to do exactly that. And Nick's got a lot of great resources, like he talked about, advisors and his own knowledge. So it never hurts to just start the conversation, right?
That's right.
Well, before we wrap it up, I want to say a big thank you once again to our sponsor, Cardenas Part Solutions, for helping make this episode a reality. And Nick, thanks a ton for being a guest on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Joe. It really was fun.
You bet. As for the rest of you, I hope to catch you on the next episode of The Manufacturing Executive.